Welcome to Talking Tuesday. I am your host, Fancy Quant, and today we are going to talk a little bit about economics, specifically here in the US, and a bit of my frustration here over the last few years. I've never been able to fully put this together, so we will give this a shot in today's episode and see kind of how this goes. But the United States has kind of been in this struggling place here, and I think we're starting to really see it here in 2023 as we're rolling into 2024 elections. We're seeing a lot of divide, we're seeing a lot of hatred, we're seeing a lot of wars, we're seeing a lot of issues here. The United States, oddly, seems quite divided based on what it was in the past here. There's a song by, I think, Oliver Anthony that's came out recently, and of course it's become quite popular. And then there was like a country star that was mad about it, who was, in one party, and it wasn't a real country star. And yet I think a lot of people really kind of connected with what he was saying. And I think the song, if you don't know, it's about more or less like the people in Washington, D.C. are getting richer and richer, more or less the rich men from Richmond, Virginia, talking about, the guy working for minimum wage, the Social Security, working class, people that are just really like, I don't know, unlike these social programs, they're kind of hitting rock bottom here. And I've thought about making a video about this in the last few years from an economic standpoint. I feel like I have a very unique, position towards this, background towards this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my background. We'll talk a little bit about the economics, maybe a little bit more about the division here, why I don't think we should be seeing a division, and kind of what, I don't know, maybe what's causing it. I don't really know. But let's talk about this a little bit here and dive on in. So my background is I grew up in a predominantly white, city in Washington State called Spokane, Washington. It has become far more diverse over the years, but we didn't have a lot of diversity growing up. I grew up on the South Hill, which was like this richer, nicer area of Spokane. So you have like the hill, which is like where the wealthier people live. And then of course, down the hill, downtown, you have kind of the poorer people. And then as you go out, there's an area called the Valley that was kind of like middle class-ish. Some of them were wealthy, some of them were pretty poor. And then you went further up north, it kind of got poorer, but then it towards the fringes, you started having nice houses again. But I grew up on the South Hill, so most people assumed I was in that nice, comfortable, middle class, wealthy family. And yet, growing up as a kid, I couldn't stand most of the kids of the South Hill that I grew up with because most of them are more or less born with a silver spoon in their mouth, right? Their mommy and daddy paid for their college. They were all going to college. I hated public schooling with a passion there. I hated a lot of the kids there as well. I hated school a lot. But all these kids, they just drove me nuts. They're always like the rich kids. And of course, everybody thought like, oh, you live on the South Hill and, people you should be friends with these sorts of kids. And of course, the way the South Hill is designed too is you had people that were on the slope of the South Hill that were also in the high schools. And yet I didn't get along with these rich kids because more or less they didn't have any work ethic. They didn't have any drive. And even when I look back at these kids, their mom and dad's, mom stayed home because their dads made enough money. Their parents had finance and insurance and doctors and lawyers, and they stayed home and they made great money. But these kids were just pieces of garbage. They didn't really have the work ethic piece here. And I think this is where my struggle comes in, is I just didn't hang out with those kids. But I always had this misfit piece to me that I don't know, even in elementary school, towards the end there, I had some kind of different friends, not great, but I had some friends. But I also hung out with a lot of times, field trips, I'd hang out with what are called the BI kids, which are the behavioral issue kids. So DI is disability issues, BI is behavioral issues. I don't know why. I just seem to click more with those that have behavioral issues. And then rolling into junior high as well, I never really found my clique or my niche, or no one really accepted me either. Again, I'm not that much different than most of these other kids, other people here, but I just didn't get along with them. I didn't seem to have the same sort of values here. And then oddly enough, my friends, some of the people that kind of hung around me were kids that were, out in gangs and doing violence and getting, issues with drugs. And luckily I kind of skated on the edges. I never got involved in any of these sorts of things. And I always had a few really good, just down to earth kids that were kind of hardworking kids from hardworking parents. And we kind of were the misfit clique here. There was about 4 of us that hung out regularly. We started riding motorcycles. So if you want the economics class of that. People that race motocross are typically viewed as like white trash, like people kind of made fun of you in high school. But it's kind of like the redneck kind of white trash, nitty gritty kids that were out riding motorcycles. It wasn't, the rich kid. I mean, there was a rich kid that had some motorcycles, and him and his mom and dad got on their little tiny little 4-stroke bikes and putted around some trails. But again, it was like this weird divide here. I had a buddy of mine murdered when I was in, I guess, junior high, and he was in high school. Again, I wasn't really close with the guy, but we hung out in junior high, then we went to high school. Again, drugs and violence and gang issues. My neighborhood, again, being this really nice, wealthy neighborhood, a few blocks down, we had a serial killer. I went to school with his son. A neighbor of mine, their kid ended up in a murder trial, doing some of the violence as well. And so you start to look back on this, and it's like my hometown, while it's not very diverse, it seems to have a lot of crime and a lot of issues. It was the meth capital at one point. It's also one of the auto theft capitals in the country as well. It's kind of a rough town, and yet there's this really weird separation of the upper fancy white class of people. But when you look at Spokane, you can't really say there is, I don't know, like a white class or like the majority here. And I think this is one of the points I'd like to make in this video, is that we start to see a lot of division in this country, and a lot of this comes from people that start doing groupings. And I think you start to rewind here, starting to look through a lot of my past with this, right? I had some regular friends. I mean, a buddy of mine's dad was a web designer. Another buddy of mine has a single mom, but I think she was like a nurse and taught nursing, and I think she taught nursing. She was a professor and did nursing. And then another buddy of mine, his dad was a pest control guy. And another friend of mine, his dad was a lawyer. So I had this really good eclectic mix of friends here. I think one of the dividing factors that we start to see is people start to talk a lot about, it's us versus them. Right? It's the whites versus the minorities. It's the blacks versus everybody else. It's the Hispanics versus everybody else here. And so when you look at this from economically, right, this is starting to kind of tear us apart as a country here. And one of the predominant driving factors of success in the United States is the fact that the United States is made up of nothing more than a bunch of misfits. So even when you start to go back into history, you're going back to 14, 15, 16, 1700s and all that. Right? We had these settlers that came over that were misfits that no longer wanted to be a part of Europe. And then you had Native Americans here originally, and there's some horror atrocities going back and forth between both them and the settlers. And, the settlers end up killing them, and bad things happen in general, but you start to look at these historical kind of shapings and changings. The United States is just a misfit group. It doesn't matter how you dice it. Even when you start to look back, like at half my family came through Ellis Island, so not very long ago. I'm only third born generation Italian American, of course 100% American now. But you start to realize the United States has something unique about it, something that sets it apart, that makes it different, especially you start to look at success rates, things like GDP. So one of the big economic secrets of the United States is GDP per capita, which means how much output we get per person is significantly higher than most other countries in the world here. Especially look at like the big powers. Economically, what you see too is you see countries like China have a lot of GDP, but it's because they have a lot of people. But the issue is they don't generate enough value per person. So GDP is nothing more than value, right? How much value you're generating. They don't generate enough value. And so you look at countries like China and India, and they can massively boom these populations, but the standards of living don't get better just by growing the population. Right? You can increase GDP because you have more people, so more consumption and more goods have to be made. And so you do that, but the unit value just isn't very good. So that's one thing to start looking at when you look at the United States, is that the fact that historically, even though we have had our issues, I'm not saying we have not had issues in the United States. I think that's one of the things that drives us, though, is that we have looked back and said, wow, we really screwed up. And so we went back and we've made changes and rules, and, we've kind of fought across the time, and, we're pushing forward as a country, making things better here. I think that's one of the driving factors, but when you start to look back at a lot of the deterioration probably in the last 5 to 10 years here, I think social media and the internet has been an absolute terrible thing, because it's not bringing us together. It's starting to look at these sort of pockets here of where you're being pulled from, where you're being pushed from. And so going back to my background a little bit here now, I work in banking, right? I work in this really highfalutin industry. I rub shoulders with all kinds of people that have fancy schmancy, degrees, masters, PhDs, and all that. And again, it's been hard to find my group, but I've started to find people I really click with. And I've realized across time, right, my eclectic band of people I get along with. It's never been, I only get along with some sort of racial group, or I've never gotten along with, some sort of class group. And I think this is where Oliver Anthony's song's really coming in. And I think it has a lot of truth to it. So it's ringing true, right? These politicians, in many ways, I'm going to say politicians as this massive blank statement, they've screwed all of us over, and they're horrible people, and they're making millions of dollars, which is ridiculous. And they're not adding much value, right? They're just kind of pissing away our dollars and our funds and misspending things. And they do these pork barrelings where it's like, I really want this and somebody else wants this. Let's pool all these different initiatives together. We'll vote on it. We'll spend another few $1 trillion. And then we just don't really care what happens to the people. So we'll just keep taxing them and borrowing money and just trashing the country we live in. And so I think this is what's ringing true. A lot of people on both sides of the aisle, the left and the right, are getting a little tired and fed up with the way politics is working. But again, we gotta stop doing this classification here. And I can't just say all politicians are bad. That's no way out of this mess, right? We need somebody to do something good to represent us in these political kind of positions here. I think Tulsi Gabbard makes a really good example of this. Again, I'm not picking sides or anything, but she really she's like out working with the people, like when she's from Hawaii. When the fires in Maui were there, she was out there looking at that. When they had train crashes in the Midwest here, she was out looking at that, right? She seems to kind of be on top of the ball, but she's also kind of standoffish on, like, she doesn't want to be, hungry with power and like up there, like, I don't know, pushing all her agenda. But we need more people that are going to be looking at this from the perspective of what is going to help bring all of us together. I absolutely hate the term bipartisan because it indicates that everybody is a part of two parties. For those of you that don't know, I am libertarian, which is not one of the two parties. Again, promoting freedom and economics, and capitalism is far more important for getting better value out of a country and out of net worth here. And a lot of that, I think, comes back down to, so going back through this with the politics, right? We don't need to see things as left or right. We don't need to see things as black or white. We don't need to see things now as politician, non-politician. And then to top this off, I think the absolute worst one I continually see today is it's really pushed and sought after to crap on those that are wealthy, right? If you have money, you must have screwed people over. I've been around a lot of people recently where it's like they have this mindset that, like, oh, those people, they have tons of money. Oh, they're terrible people. And they just talk trash constantly, right? Wall Street's terrible. I've heard this again and again. Wall Street's terrible. Everyone on Wall Street's terrible. Let me be the first to tell you, if you watch my channel at all, I've mentioned the banks are corrupt. The banks are woke. The banks are trying to more or less push social agendas at the expense of the people, all right? They're wanting power. They're wanting to put their politicians into position. They're spending millions of dollars to lobby to get rid of regulations, not because it's good for the environment, not because it's good for the banks, but because it costs them less money. So, but again, it's that balancing piece of how do you bring out the truth without having all these agendas tied behind you? And I think that's a lot of what's driving this, is we start to see a lot of people that, somebody's sponsoring them and they've got a bunch of money and they're kind of pushing this agenda, and it's like, I'm getting paid to say this, and so more people are getting paid more and more and more money. And so you start to see, all of a sudden political parties, instead of stepping back, I mean, COVID's one of these big issues here. I'm not going to go too much into this, but people take sides, and it's like they don't stop to look at actual hard research. They're looking at it going, oh, this organization, they said this must be true. And again, we can't expect the average citizen to be able to go out there and read a bunch of academic scientific papers. Recently I was reading one, somebody claimed to, not even related to COVID at all, a whole other thing with an academic paper, and they missed the fact that they said, well, if this, then that, therefore this paper is accurate. And you start just reading through the paper, and the authors are like, this is anecdotal, that's a very small sample, we know it's not representative, we just hope this spurs some interesting research, and these three separate conditions all have to be met. And of course, in the scenario I was looking at, medically, only one of those conditions were met, not three, so it's not really a valid paper to argue your point. But you can't expect the average person to be like, every time there's an issue, you're going to run out and find some sort of academic paper. And again, you can't find a academic paper on things. You have to look at the whole set of research. You have to go through multiple papers and all of the research, because one study might find something is beneficial, one finds it's not beneficial. But again, going back to saying, this is where a lot of the division's coming from. We're starting to see, right, we're dividing things out. Like, oh, you're left, I'm right. If you're left, you must believe this. If you are right, you must believe this. One of the most frustrating things here, I'm in Texas, of course, Dallas, Texas here, the border's been a complete nightmare. There's just people pouring over. There's on the news here constantly. And then of course you have the people, of course, in Chicago and in New York City and, Seattle and all these other annoying states. I know they're liberal states. I'm dividing this a little bit here and classifying it, but you have a lot of these politicians on here saying, it's not a big deal, right? It's no big deal. Like, just let them all in. We're all immigrants. And yet I'm talking to the left on this, again, being in the middle, being a libertarian. I'm talking to them about it and they go, oh, these Republicans are horrible people. They're terrible. They don't want any immigrants. I mean, how do you think they got here? Their whole families are immigrants. And I'm just looking at, again, the left on this, like shaking my head, like most of the right, you're always going to find outliers, but most of the right on this case, it's not that they're against immigration. They're against illegal immigration, which is why the government has quotas and numbers and visas and processes you have to go to ensure that you're not a drug dealer or a sex trafficked child. So that's the other thing, oh, these poor kids are put in cages and taken from their parents. Yeah, those kids were sex slaves. Their parents sold them. They were stole from their parents. Anyway, so the whole thing. And yet magically now you look at New York City and I'm just like laughing like, you idiots. Like Texas is trying to stop this. We're trying to do our best and our own country can't stop and take a neutral position of looking at this and realizing, it's not that the right is against anyone immigrating in. It's that we want people to follow logical processes, right? The discussion we should be having as a country is who should we be letting in? What qualifications should they have, right? Should we be having quotas for countries? Should we have educational things that we're looking at? Maybe we let in X amount of people in all these different sorts of occupations. Look at this strategically. This is not happening anywhere, not on the left, not on the right. We don't see a lot of this, but I do see in this example how the left really slandering the right and slapping it on there because I'm talking to these people and I'm just so frustrated. It's like, come back to Texas. And now, of course, New York and Chicago and the news just freaking out, losing their minds. All these immigrants are taking over their cities and costing them millions and millions of dollars. And it's like, we could have stopped this. But again, we start to see this division, right? Left and right is a big division that we consistently see here in the United States for some odd reason. It's not getting anywhere because as soon as somebody says something, the right will misinterpret the left misinterprets the right, and now everybody's on the exact opposite sides, both sides that are being, slandered. So like the right saying the left's doing something and the left saying the right's doing something. They always find the extremists in each group, and then they twist it and they make it into some crazy argument on their own side. And it's driving me nuts. I don't know how you overcome this. I think one of these things is we need to get back to better curriculum and education and schooling here. So again, being somebody that's kind of floated in the middle, grew up around a bunch of different people. I didn't even want to go to college when I was graduating high school. Parents kind of nudged me into it. And then oddly enough, I took a really good liking to math and statistics and have done quite well. But I also worked construction for 8 years. I was a 35-ton lattice crane operator, did concrete work, did manufacturing with this. I built this whole shop you see in the background. Like it's a 2-story garage. I built almost the entire thing solo. My dad helped me with some brick and stone work. I had a couple companies come out to help with like the garage doors. And I'm trying to get an HVAC guy to fix a few things, but I've done almost everything else, right? I mean, I've done framing and concrete work and all kinds of stuff here, electrical, roofing, all that, painting. But what I'm trying to say with this is that we need to look at the education system, I think, from an economic standpoint of we need people across the entire spectrum here, right? We need people working in mining. We need people working in manufacturing and in services. And we need people in the analytics and, internet and technology and marketing and banking and real estate. Like we need a robust economy. We need to stop depending, I think, a lot on international things. And I think in many cases, we've kind of given up and just been like, it's cheaper to get it from China. Let's not look for a good solution, a technological solution here. And I was kind of hitting on earlier with this, right, with GDP, you can't just increase numbers of people to increase GDP per capita. It'll increase your total GDP. You have more people. But the big success of the United States over the years has been the fact that we create new cool technology. Right? We're always on the cutting edge. We always have better technology than most other countries. Of course, you're not going to be the best at everything, but the United States has done great at getting good business ideas to market, creating good solutions, optimizing and streamlining things. So even with like AI, we're light years away from a lot of the things people are waving their hands about. But these things should assist people in making jobs easier so that instead of having, 10 people doing some sort of task, you could have 2 people doing the same amount of tasks. You have 8 people now that are more or less unemployed. So we can take those 8 people and find something different and more interesting for them to do, right? And again, what happens when 2 people are doing the work instead of 10 is now the company's making more money and they can lower prices for the consumer, so consumers can consume more goods and they have extra capital now because prices are lower. Again, the real secret to growing economies, the real secret to the United States' success here has been really the investment in people. So immigration's been a critical piece. This bringing in really smart people. So from anywhere, right? Doesn't matter where you are. You're in the United States, awesome. If you're a genius and you're great at your job and you have some great insight from another country, like come on in. We've worked with these people and brought them in through immigration programs. There's some dark sides of this immigration as well. You can look at Operation Paperclip. There's a book on this whole thing, but again, looking at how we bring in better technology to make jobs easier and better. The goal should not be we take everyone's meaning of life away. Because you need something to get up for in the day, right? You need to get up and go to a job. It'd be nice if everyone liked their job. Everyone has very different opinions, views, and perspectives. This is one thing I think that we miss out on a lot here. Something that's been forgotten is that everybody has differences. Everybody is unique. So playing into this, pocketing everyone into groups of race and religion and, politics and wealth and social statuses, what we start to see though is that everyone's actually unique. Like, I can't stand accounting. I tried it for a while. I hated it. And I know people are friends of mine that just love accounting. They're like, oh, it's such a good job. And everything about it's great for them. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. Again, another example, I love laying brick and stone. I could do it. It's hard on my body. I enjoy being outside. I enjoy doing it. I absolutely hate doing HVAC. I hate doing plumbing. I hate doing electrical. But again, everybody has unique skills and interests and hobbies. And we need to, as a country, come back to the idea of meritocracy a bit more capitalism here. I always get people on specific sides and aisles and different groups coming in saying, here's this one example of this failure. And they go on like the healthcare system in the United States. And I just shake my head like, okay, you have one example, which is great. In the healthcare example, the AMA is like a monopoly. It dictates and determines how many doctors come out so they can restrict the supply. And then the insurance companies come in. And again, it's not capitalism. It's not free trade. You have restrictions put in place by government and regulations, which is causing these sort of issues here. We also need rationality of thought and idea here. So there are things that you just need government for, like the international freeway system here in the United States, the interstates. Right? You just need government. You need tax dollars to do this. But we should be having more in-depth, interesting conversations around how our tax dollars are spent instead of this massive budget where everything gets pocketed in these pork barrels and they just hide things away and millions of dollars going for stupid projects that most people don't want. But we need to get back to these kind of fundamental theories. We need to get back to looking at our country very strategically, very excitedly. We need to crush the stupid idea that we are nationalists and that's a horrible thing and we shouldn't like being Americans. I'm seeing this a lot. Very specific parties pushing this as well, and subgroups and extremist groups as well. It's a war against being American. It's a war against diversity, right? Diversity really means everybody is unique and we value each other based on our skill sets and our interests and hobbies and who we are as a person, decisions we have made. That is a very American thing to do. And yet I see this as kind of being like blackballed. Like you can't really say like, I love America and we should be pro-American and we should spend more money in America and bring more jobs back to America. And yet this is kind of, I think, where this Anthony Oliver, I think I messed this up before, but Anthony Oliver, the guy with the song here about the Richmond from Virginia, I think this is what's striking the chord with the working class in America is, again, we have politicians and different people dividing us, right? There's the working class and then there's the upper class and this is the wealthy class. And yet the working class is upset and they're frustrated and this is a divide and they hate all the wealthy. They hate all those jobs. And I'm like trying to pump the brakes on this too. Hold on. There are great people that are running businesses. There are great people that are employing you. Of course, not all of them. There are some terrible people here, but we can't get this division here because this is what more or less we drive. You look historically, this is Marxism, right? This is communism. This is what happened is it was, the wealthy versus the poor, and then the poor, rose up and overthrew them. And it was this great country. And then everybody starved in horrible deaths of punishment and cruelty and corruption abroad because you threw out capitalism here, where you need market competition and people competing here. And I think this is where I'm a little hesitant on that song of like, I get it. It resonates with me as well. I understand this frustration. There is kind of this bougie class of people that think they're above everybody. So Sam Bankman-Fried's a great example of this. What we need to start doing as a country is start coming back to the idea of let's have the discussions around what are core American values here. I think one that is missing is family. So you can look at research all across the board. Those children that are raised in families that have two parents that are, well supported, they're going to have just a better potential in life. They're going to have lower issues with drugs or crime and all those sorts of issues. They're going to have higher incomes, higher education. Now I'm going to put higher education as a class not typically thought about. So higher education meaning those just have skills. So if you're a welder, that's a trained skill. That's a trade, right? You have higher education, a higher ability to that. These sorts of people are more stable. Now, the reason for this is having a family, having someone there for you, is having a network around you. It's having the people to be there for you. And I get it, right? You're born into the family you're born into. I got lucky. A lot of people aren't going to be born into a family that's there to support you and take care of you and push you along with your dreams and your goals and help guide you in the right direction. Sometimes you're born to a set of parents that are drug dealers or, drug users or depressed, and they just terrible, abusive parents. I get it. But as a society and as a culture, we tend to take in this perspective of we are accepting of everybody. So we're trying to pretend like we encourage the diversity and the freedoms, but we're really not. What we're saying is everybody's the exact same. We don't care if you have skills or not. We're all the same. And then magically there's a group of people behind the scenes that are making a bunch of money off of this and then kind of allocating this to getting more power and getting more votes. And you start to find out there's a lot of corruption going on behind those groups pushing anti-family kind of rhetoric here. So again, pro-family is one of these. Pro-country and nationalism, I think, is another one. We are not looking at the United States very strategically anymore. I don't know why. It can't be us versus them. It has to be us as a whole entire country of Americans. We need to stand together and look at, how do we improve things for everybody? Again, socialism is not the answer for this, guys. I know it sounds like socialism's great, right? It plans for everybody. But there's not competition, right? We want to compete amongst each other. We want to be very fierce in competition globally as well. So we can't forget the fact the United States is not isolated from everybody else. There are other factors and issues going on with this. But family, again, having those sorts of national values, bonding together here. And the other pieces are like hard work ethic. I just don't see this. This seems odd me saying this, but you see a lot of people that are very anti-work ethic, very anti-financial stability here. One of the absolute worst things I consistently see is people say the American dream that used to be is stupid and dumb. I mean, not everybody wants to own a house and not everybody wants a white picket fence and yada, yada, yada. That imaging, that piece, that slogan of American kind of ideology and built into us, having the house with the white picket fence, that really represented financial stability. If you had a family, you had a house with a white picket fence, meaning it was nice, it was taken care of, you had the funds to do so. More or less, the American dream is financial stability and freedom. And I think we're getting far away from this as we're seeing terrible financial decisions from the millennials, Gen Zs. Again, I'm part of the millennial class, unfortunately, here. But again, we need to start getting back to these roots, these educational things, and figure out what's going on here, right? We can't be saying, spend all your money. Don't worry about retirement. You should be out there enjoying your life today, right? Life is all about balance. It's all about freedom as well. And so when these people make these stupid decisions and they lose all their money and they spend it on traveling and vacations, I shouldn't bail you out. Same thing with, student debt is another example here. You took a loan out. You knew what a loan was. You were obviously 18. And then you just didn't want to pay the loan back because you think the school screwed you because you made a stupid decision yourself. So maybe we should all be a little bit more honest with ourselves here and realize we made a stupid decision and maybe encourage those around you not to make the same dumb decision and spend $100,000 on an undergrad degree for some reason for an English degree that there's no job at the end, right? It's not a fun thing that we should just pile onto the government and then morally you owe that. We're missing the morals piece here. You took money from someone, regardless if it's the government, a corporation, or whoever else. You took money. You need to pay that back. That's a moral thing. You need to think about your responsibilities. You need to think about what you promised, and you deliver on these promises. And unfortunately, we don't see this as an American value anymore either. I think this is where a lot of the so-called working class is frustrated because a lot of them aren't getting college degrees. They want to send their kids to trade schools. They want to get skills. They want to get training. And yet you're trying to pile now your kid's debt from some worthless degree you got or some worthless university onto the other rest of the classes and other people around here. And that is not fair and not a good decision here. Now we could go down the rabbit hole arguing about, who should bear the cost and how we should distribute it and how we should make it equal for all. That's a whole other discussion. Again, these sorts of discussions should be happening with fun, intellectual debate, but they should have good, solid ideas behind it instead of it just being like, the left thinks this and the right thinks this and you're dumb and you're stupid. And then it turns into these great, massive debates here. And it's like, I hate talking about them. Right? I mean, I'd love to sit and talk about it on the YouTube channel more. I'd love to talk. These things impact economics and businesses and finance. They even impact quantitative finance, surprisingly enough. But you end up with too many people that get too knee-jerk reaction and too upset. There's not a good intellectual discussion about it and an acceptance of differences. So this is one thing that also drives me nuts here. Today we are missing that piece where people are just, they want everyone to be accepting, but then they are not accepting of themselves. And so they say, you should love everybody. And these are all these small groups and pockets of people I identify with. And you should like everything they do. Even if they have terrible anti-American values, you should like them. And then when you say like, no, I don't really like them. And then you're like, wait, you don't like me because I don't agree with you? And then they get upset about it. And it's like, wait, if you're accepting of everybody, you should be accepting of me as someone who's not in agreement with you. So again, bringing these things together, I think being more American is very underrated these days. It needs to really be pushed. We need to set more values. I think we need to have more interesting conversation. I think this is why if you watch Joe Rogan, his dialogue's quite interesting because you have people actually coming to the table to have an interesting discussion. There's not a lot of yelling and screaming and tantrums and childlike behavior. It's people actually talking about ideas, asking curious questions. So Joe's great at this. But we need to bring more of that to light without so much ridiculous name calling and more specifically, without all the segregations here. I think that's the biggest issue here. We need to step back and realize, yes, I am a part of specific sorts of races and classes and religions and social status and all that. But at the end of the day, we do not split down the lines, right? You cannot find any sort of class, social economic class, religion, race, I don't know, marital status, and that you can't find anything that really divides people into one idea or the other idea. And I think, unfortunately, the media has pushed this a lot and kind of divided a lot of people against each other. If you're curious on why a lot of this happens, I think a lot of this happens for political voting. It's much easier to classify and target and label people, and then to have a whole, bring people together and rally them up that, oh, these people are terrible. They're coming against us. We all need to, push them down. It's Marxism again. But we start to get these things where people are getting this rhetoric just to get votes, just to get likes, just to easily classify people. And unfortunately, I don't think this is very beneficial here. So anyways, these are just my thoughts here, what's going on here in the United States currently. I will not leave the U.S. I will stand and fight here forever because I truly do believe in being an American. I truly believe there are enough of us out there. I think there are masses of us in the United States that still have a lot of these core values. Unfortunately, this is not what's being taught and promoted in schools most often. It's not everywhere, but a lot of schools have kind of pushed away from being an actual true, country-loving American here. And I think if enough of us can kind of rally together and have these discussions, hopefully a little more productive with other people, I think maybe, we can start seeing a bit more progress in the United States here instead of kind of this deviation we're seeing where people are kind of like name calling and classifying people and trying to get away from, I think, intellectual thought and discussion because it might be a little bit uncomfortable. So anyways, those are my 2 cents. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And as always, until next time.